Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, RB Laws, and this is my co host.
For Wells.
We appreciate all the recent support and viewership on our content. Happy New Year's, and we hope you guys had a great and safe New Year's. And before we do get started, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the OBT Podcast for more content and updates.
Yes, so we are now in 2025, new year. Still having the NBA season going on, right? We're getting closer and closer to the halfway point. And I think, what we're going to probably do this episode is I would say we're going to do essentially kind of like a check-in of sorts and kind of see where a lot of these teams are at. So maybe some of this you might have heard a little bit of when we did our New Year's resolutions, but this is going to be different, right? Because it's going to be, maybe some stuff that also could be a little bit more warning signs, negative, things like that. But, we're going to get started with that. So I think let's start off in the Eastern Conference. And I think, in terms of where we're going to begin is I think we should probably just kind of look at overall, the main contenders in the Eastern Conference, right? Because obviously going into the season, right, we were kind of in the mode of it's Boston and then it's everybody else, right? So I guess the first question I would ask is, do we still feel that way, right? Where like, do we still feel pretty confident about Boston being the best team in the Eastern Conference? And then, everybody else, maybe the tiers, the groups have changed, but, is Boston to you still the clear-cut favorite?
Yeah, I would say that they are the favorite. I think their play through the season hasn't really necessarily dictated it. I don't think. I think we know from a roster perspective, like we know how talented that group of guys is because they've won the championship before. But to me, from what I've seen through their games, I mean, it seems like they're coasting a little bit. Taking that amount of threes and obviously still making them, but I think come playoff time we'll see a different version of them, or not even really a different version, but a similar version to what we saw, in the playoffs last year. But yeah, I think they are the clear-cut favorite, but I think there's a lot of teams that you can't really discount. Like, I would include Cleveland. I would drop them in that bucket, and I would definitely drop New York. That's my finals pick, so I'm going to stand on it. But, overall, I think it's those three, and I guess you could have thrown Philly in if they were healthy, but I just think now they might be cooked. And Milwaukee, I don't think that they're not in that conversation. But I would say the top three seeds right now are definitely up there, but Boston definitely is number one for sure.
Yeah, I mean, like with the Celtics, I do agree with that. I mean, like you said, it's been not quite as dominant this season, right? Like the Cavs have kind of taken the Celtics' place as the most dominant team in the league this season, in terms of the numbers, net rating, things like that. Um, for them, I think probably one thing that has hurt them is that there's been, I think, a little bit more, missed time with a lot of these guys, right? Like, even Tatum has missed not that many games, but like just they haven't had a whole lot of games with their core guys, right? Because like Porzingis didn't really play at all to begin the season, right? He didn't come back, until what, like a month or so in. Even guys like Jaylen Brown, Drew Holiday, and some of these other guys, right? Like they've missed a handful of games. Again, it's not like it's that many, but just in general, that's probably one of the differences this year. The thing that has helped, keep them afloat still is that Tatum has, obviously been really good. Kind of, like a dark, he's not going to win it, right? But like in terms of like the MVP race, right? Like he's up there in terms of like he's easily been one of the five best players in the league. And like you said, I think because they did win the title last year, there's just a level of you're just probably not going to see the same version of the Celtics during the regular season. You're just probably going to see, like you said, a version that's a little bit more coasting until you get to the end, right? Like where, like you said, come playoff time, I think you'll see, if they're healthy, right? I think you'll see a more locked in version of this Celtics team.
Yeah.
Because they want to still win. Obviously, going back to back is very difficult, but I think that's kind of what you're seeing. But I think obviously this time around compared to when we began the season, right? The big thing is the Cavs, right? The fact that the Cavs have been, not just great, but like historically great, as far as the regular season goes. I mean, again, they're 29-4, right? So they're on a pace to win over 70 games, right? They just went through a stretch of road games, right? Where, they played, what was it, the Lakers, they played the Nuggets, and they played Golden State. And all three of those games, were games where they won pretty handily. I mean, the Lakers game was competitive, but like you knew for the most part that the Cavs were probably going to win that game. It got close
Agreed.
at different points. But just in general, they've been, on a tear, right? And I think, when you look at their performance this season, again, we've talked about it, right? The key things is the two young guys, right? Garland and Mobley, you've gotten really good years out of them, right? Like Garland has had a major bounce back season after having a season last year where he just was not healthy. Mobley's taken another step forward. They have more depth. They have a new coach, and they're just getting great performances out of pretty much everybody that's playing, that's playing minutes, right? And that's kind of something that I think, it's wild because I remember going from the postseason last year, right? We were kind of the mindset of like the Cavs might not have a much higher ceiling than like the second round, and
Hmm.
that it may be best for them to probably just kind of break this core up, or at least move Donovan Mitchell. And remember, you had the wild stories about how what was it? It was Garland, where it was kind of a scenario where if Mitchell re-signed, then there might be a scenario where they don't even where Garland asks out and is like, I don't even want to be here. So
Yeah.
you had all this drama surrounding them, stuff about like Jared Allen, about how, they were kind of almost insinuating that he chose to not really play, right, during the latter part, during that second round series. So just a lot of weird stuff that seems to be, corrected pretty much in every way. So I think, like you said, I feel like they've gotten to a level where I think they're probably right after Boston, I would say, right? Like, but I guess the question to you is like, so where would you compare them to how would you compare them to the Knicks, right? Because the Knicks, they're the team that I think going into the season, most people were higher on than the Cavs. But, the Knicks have, after kind of a weird start to the season, they've stabilized since then. And they're like right there pretty much with, Boston, right? Like, I think they're like, what, like a half a game back of Boston.
Yeah.
Maybe it'll change, in this next stretch. But just in general, like they've been playing really good basketball as of late. And they've kind of found themselves, they've been able to kind of get a better version of themselves, right? Bridges has been better. Towns has had basically the best stretch of his career. And now they've gotten a little bit healthier in terms of their other guys that were out to start the season too.
Yeah. I mean, I think with Cleveland, and New York, I think they're in the same tier, but for different reasons. With Cleveland, there wasn't like a crazy amount of personnel changes. It was more of a system change where, definitely more free flowing in terms of ball movement and more efficient looks, less, one on one and stagnant offense. I think that's been the key that I like, not relying just on Darius Garland to be a facilitator. It's more of like a everybody eats kind of philosophy, which I think has done wonders for that team. And then with New York, I think having a guy like Towns definitely opens up the offense. He's playing free, and I think the freest that he's ever played in his career. He's not really. It doesn't really feel like he's playing second fiddle to anybody. It feels like it's more of like a dynamic duo than 1A, one or like one and two. You know what I mean? Like it really feels like 1A, 1B, really.
Right.
And I think that's the thing that's really key. I think it's helped his confidence. I think it's helped and rubbed off on the Knicks in general. Mikal Bridges looks a lot better. Just the whole unit, and I think you're you feel like they probably need one more thing to win the title, but who knows? They could scrape by with the talent that they do have on the roster, but that bench is
Yeah.
just really really rough. That's the big difference between those two teams. Cleveland has a
Hmm.
ton of depth. Every guy who plays every night pretty much is having a great game, but then in New York, you're really relying on your starters too heavily, I think.
Yeah. And I think that's would like you said, that might be one of the differences, like if they were to meet in the playoffs is, the Cavs team the first time around when they played the Knicks, right? Like they were kind of the team that most people picked to win that series. And then as that series went on, you saw the problems where it's like Mobley wasn't quite ready. I mean, Jared Allen literally said the lights were brighter than expected. They also had no depth, right? Like they had nobody at the four that could play next to either of those guys, so they couldn't really play them separately.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Guys coming off the bench, it was like Danny Green at the end of his career, Ricky Rubio at the end. So like this is a better team than it was before. And it like I said, it'll just be the thing that will help Cleveland, I think that we talked about for sure, is the fact that they probably clinched, at worst a 2 seed, right? So it's like So if when they go into the postseason, what'll help them obviously now is that if it gets to a game 7, it'll be in Cleveland, and I
Mhm.
think that's what you want. Because that's what happened last season, right? Like, they ended up having game 7 in Cleveland against the Magic, right?
Yeah.
And then they ended up and that ended up helping them out. It didn't look like it in the first half, but still. Um, that's the team that I think has been pretty impressive because again, like they've ran back the same roster, but it's been a lot of internal growth from a number of guys and some, like you said, some extra depth. Karis LeVert off the bench, right? He's playing very well for them, right? And that was a
Yes.
guy that we had talked about at different points, just wasn't always playing well, but pretty much everybody for them has played great. It's just a matter of how many of those guys can help them in the playoffs. But as a whole, playoff wise, if you get a good version of Garland and Mobley with Mitchell, that should probably be enough to have you feel good about most of these playoff series.
Yeah, I agree.
And then after that, I guess the next tier, right? That's kind of, so we have those three teams, I guess, in that first tier, and then you're saying like Milwaukee, kind of, Philly, kind of, like if they were, like if Philly was healthy, could they be in that
Yeah.
tier?
Yeah.
But like you can't trust their health just because of just because of the guys on the roster.
Yeah.
Paul George honestly also hasn't played that well this season. I mean, I know he had a decent game the other night, but that's kind of the piece that's a little bit disappointing, right? But Embiid's kind of returning into form, and then Maxi's been playing pretty well at different points. So they're kind of a team to look out for, but they still have a little bit of work to do because they still need to climb up in the standings because they're still 11th right now, which of course that can change, but they're behind some of these teams a little bit, so they got to catch up, right? And then the Bucks, they've been playing a lot better. I mean, they're getting smashed by the Nets right now, but of course that could change because it's still the third quarter. But they've also had a few games where like Giannis has been out, Lillard's been out. The other night they were playing the Pacers and they were getting blown out in the first half, and then Giannis leads them back, including with a bunch of mid-range jumpers. So I think they're at least a scary team, especially if you get that version of Giannis too, right? But I still don't feel like I'm comfortable with them as much as some of these other teams. They've been playing much better basketball, but just those other teams as a whole, I think I just feel more comfortable with. Um, and then after that, right, like the Magic are like a sleeper team, but I don't think they can win the East. But, the fact that they've been hanging around with all their, with their two main guys out, I think is very impressive.
Hmm.
Indiana's been has been disappointing this season, but they've been playing way better as of late because Halliburton's been really good. They're getting contributions from other guys, like even Jarvis Walker's played very well. So they're kind of a team to look out for, maybe as like the next 20 games. Let's see where they're at. Do they kind of start pulling back up? Miami is weird because they're 6-4 in their last 10, but they've had some really strange things with Butler going on where it just kind of feels like he's just sort of just there, but like not really, right?
Hmm.
Like in this Pacers game that they played, I mean, they got annihilated by this team for most of the game. They lost 128-115, and Jimmy Butler was a minus 27 in that game, so you already know he was not a big part of that game. There was like a in the New Orleans game, there was a clip that went viral, right? Where like he takes like a one-legged step back three, right? Which is like a clearly just like I don't care type of shot. And then Trey Murphy goes down the other end and hits the three and they call a timeout. So I just kind of wonder where that situation is going. Because Hero's played very well, despite all of that, right? He's had the best season of his career, like borderline all-star.
Yeah.
Bam has had kind of a up and down season, right? So, and like maybe the Jimmy Butler factor, maybe that's part of it. I don't know. The Rozier piece just seems like it hasn't really worked out for them, but they're not in that, and they're not in that group. But they're kind of in the group where I wonder what they're actually going to do because there's been so much talk about what they do with Jimmy Butler, and maybe he's kind of in that mode now where he's going to start to make it ugly, right? But I don't know. Like they're not good enough to win the East. I think that ship has sailed at this point. But I do kind of wonder, just from like a, what's next perspective. They're kind of a team that's like almost kind of in the middle.
Yeah, I think all those teams that you mentioned are in the same tier of like figure it out, and then we can, see what's next. Because I think there are a lot of questions with a lot of these teams. Like you said, Miami, they have the question of Bam, question of Jimmy as well, and then with Philly, you have the question of health in general. Because and I that's the funny thing. Like going into the season, I mean, a lot of people predicted that this was going to happen, in terms of, yeah, probably not the best idea of pairing Paul George with Joel Embiid due to health and stuff like that. And look where that's kind of gotten them. And, it's put them in a hole that they can get out of, but just a hole that they didn't really need to be in the first place, in my opinion. Indiana, that's a tricky one because I feel like, all of their woes somewhat are on Halliburton because of his play early in the season, like, where it was just not even close to what we knew him as last season. But, it's picked up, but then, other injuries happened as well. So it just wasn't really looking like it was looking good for them. But, like you said, they have picked it up somewhat. They need to get out of the play-in, in my opinion, for me to take them seriously this year. But if they're in the play-in, then I don't think, I would say zero shot. Like all these teams, realistically, I don't think have a good chance at winning the NBA Finals this year. Like, and not even a good chance of representing the Eastern Conference at all. Like, and same goes for Milwaukee. Like you said, they have been playing better recently, but I'm just still not sold on that core of guys being able to get back to the chip. I just don't foresee it. I think the league has bypassed them, not, individually, but I think, because Giannis is an MVP candidate, but that core of guys, I'm just not too sold on it because they don't have a Drew Holiday.
Yeah, and an interesting underdog stat mentioned, like, since Pat Riley announced he wasn't trading him in the 2 games he's played, he's given them 9 points each game, 27 minutes, 25 minutes, and then in this last game of the other day, he was benched in the fourth quarter in the game that they won against New Orleans, and then in this game, I mean, he was just out there. So that's kind of where I'm just kind of wondering, like, something's got to give with that,
And
right? Where
Jimmy
it's
makes some messes though. Like if we're being honest,
yeah,
like throughout his career, what Philly that kind of ended badly. Um,
Chicago,
Chicago ended badly.
Minnesota,
Minnesota, oh my
Minnesota,
God, that was the worst one I think.
yeah, yeah, that was the worst one.
Yeah,
So
so we
yeah,
might be headed
and now
there.
and now the issue is just whether or not another team is gonna be willing to pay him, right? Whatever he's looking for, potentially long term. And then also the other question is, like, what version of him are you going to get?
Mm,
Right? Because, again, the issue for him is, even before this stretch where he just has kind of stopped trying, like, he had missed a decent amount of time. And his play had kind of been up and down where you could see, like, some games where he's playing very well and then other ones. And that could just be, a lot of different things. Who knows? But, like, say if you're Golden State, does it make sense to trade for Jimmy Butler? Because it's just, if you do it, like, you could say you're better, but I mean, you still have some major problems in that. Like, now you have a very an older core group of guys in a league where it just seems like it's very difficult for these older teams to be able to win because of the fact that you got to be able to get through the regular season. And if you can get them to the playoffs, obviously you have a chance. It's just, it's tougher now to make the playoffs, at this. I mean, you have the play in, so it technically is easier. But just in general, as we've talked about, you got to be like a top 3 seed to realistically win the title. You don't have to be to have a chance, but if you actually want to win and feel good about your chances of winning, you got to be in that group. And like the West now is kind of in flux a little bit, and we'll talk about that, once we get through this last group of teams. But I don't know, like, because there's different points where I've kind of been like, up and down about whether or not he gets moved. Like, I just can't imagine that they're gonna like just go through this the rest of the way.
you're right.
Where it's just like you're just not even trying. But I guess the question is where's the leverage to? Because there's no real teams with cap space in the offseason except for maybe Brooklyn. But then, like, why would he go there? Like, that doesn't really make any sense unless they're just a team that's just willing to just throw money at people, and
Right.
maybe they are. I don't know, but that's a situation to keep an eye on, just because of the fact that they're a team that I think going into the season, I think we kind of picked over on them a little bit, like where we
Okay.
thought that they would get close to, like, I think like maybe the upper 40s in terms of games, and they could still have like a decent record, but I think we still acknowledge that it's not a contender.
No, not at all.
And that's kind of the question. Like, if you're Miami, what are we doing? Right? It's a little bit different from some of these other teams. Atlanta, has been all right recently. They've had some injuries, so that's kind of been a problem there. But I think they've been a pleasant surprise. They've got some young guys playing well. Right? Trae Young's been doing his thing. I just kind of wonder, like, what do they do in terms of, like, are there guys that they maybe like sell while they're while their stock is really high, or do they just kind of ride it out? Because like the thing is, like they have no incentive to be bad. So I don't really see a scenario where they just start moving everybody. But maybe there's some other players where maybe they just kind of swap and be like, this team needs this guy more than us. I don't know, but they're like in an all right spot, especially in the East.
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, I think you could probably move on from a guy like a Kongwu. If I'm going to be honest, I think that he could have been the franchise center, power forward, whatever you want to call it, but I don't know. I'm just not sold on it, to be honest. So I
I think it
mean,
might be more likely that Capella ends up getting moved just because he's a veteran
I would
guy.
move
But
both of them, honestly.
yeah, yeah, I think Capella's probably the one, just because I think he's got like what 1 year left on his deal.
Yeah,
I don't know what Atlanta's going to do. And it, like, if they're not bringing him back, if they're not re-signing him, then they, kind of need to move him unless they just let him walk. But
yeah.
um, I doubt they get anything of value back for him. But like, could it just be something like, I don't know, seconds or like matching contracts? I don't know. Detroit's the one that I think has kind of been a great story this season, where again they've now surpassed their win total from last year. But unfortunately, right, they got hit with a terrible injury, right, to Jaden Ivey, where he basically has like a leg injury, right? I think they said a broken fibula. Um, just on a rough play, right, where it's like nothing, not a dirty play, but just like a play that unfortunately does happen in basketball, where it's like Cole Anthony dives for the loose ball, and then ends up kind of like diving right at Ivy, and then he ends up having the leg injury. And, if you replay that a handful of times, maybe there's a version of it where that doesn't happen, but it just stinks because, he was a guy that a lot of people had question marks about, ourselves included, and he was having a great season, and was a big part of the Pistons' success. So now they're going to be without him. They said for at least a little while, right? I think they said he's going to be reevaluated, what, like in, what was it, like a month or so, or
I think,
probably more, right?
yeah, I think it's going to be a month or plus.
Yeah, so he'll probably. I think Shams basically said like he's going to be out most of the rest of the season, because I mean, we have now 3 months left, so I doubt he comes back before, you know like late February, right? Like he's
Yeah,
probably out for at least a while,
yeah,
which sucks. But for the Pistons, they've kind of now moved up several tiers from where they were before, where now you actually feel good about this team and where they're headed. It's just a matter of what do they continue to do, because they have a lot of young guys, as well as vets, and I do kind of wonder, like, do they make like a, not a marginal move, but like maybe a move to kind of bring in some guys. Like, what if they just randomly decide, hey, why not us go after like an Ingram, or like a Butler or a Levine? I'm not saying they do it, but I do kind of wonder what their plan is. But not that they even have to really do anything, but just they're kind of a good story, right? The Bulls are a little bit different because like their record isn't bad, but it just feels like they should just kind of move on from some of these guys, because there's no real reason to be in the spot that they're in. And then that latter stretch, right? Those are the Cooper Flag teams, right? Like you're talking about Brooklyn, Charlotte, Washington, Toronto. Each kind of different levels of bad. Like Charlotte, the tough part is it's the same thing where it's just injuries left and right to the roster, right? Where I think we acknowledge every year, if they're healthy, they're probably somewhere close to that play-in mix,
hmm,
you know, something like that. But they haven't been, and that's continued to be the story. We knew the Wizards would be bad. They're 3-7 in their last 10, so they have been a little bit better recently. I think the good news for them is like Alex Sarr has been playing a lot better, right, compared to the earlier part of the season, right? Because the earlier part of the season it looked a little bit rough. But I think you at least like what you've seen out of him as of late, where he looks like a real, guy, like on both ends of the floor. Because I know you mentioned before we got on, like his shot has been better, right? Defense was already good. You're still kind of waiting, I think probably on another additional guy that we talked about in the draft, but like they're in a different spot because they're starting basically from square one. The Raptors are interesting because some of their core players are good, but they have not had very many games together. Like Barnes was supposed to miss a lot of time and then just randomly came back after like
yeah.
a week. Started off kind of slow, but he's been playing better. Grady Dick, right, before a bunch of injuries, right, was playing pretty well. Barrett was playing well. Quickly started off fine, missed a lot of time. So they have a decent group of guys. I still feel kind of strange about paying all that money to most of those guys, but like I feel like there's a better version of this team than the one we've seen, but there was never a version that I actually thought would be really, really good. But It's just, can we at least see what some of it looks like with all their guys together? Because we haven't seen a whole lot of it. And then Brooklyn, we're gonna assume they're gonna continue to keep selling off guys, right? Like, they brought a couple of new guys in, obviously D'Lo. Maxwell Lewis came in, actually scored, and then unfortunately got hurt. So hopefully that's not a long term thing. But in general, like, we don't have to spend a whole time on the teams at the bottom because most of those teams are not really much of a surprise. Like, we already kind of knew what that group was going into the season.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, it's really a tankathon for those top three guys and Ace Bailey, Flag, and
Right.
Dylan Harper. So wherever they fall is going to be wherever they go. But yeah, I think there are positives from each team, but the negatives definitely outweigh those. But I do want to touch on Detroit a little bit because they're kind of
Mhm.
reminding me of what Orlando was like, a couple seasons ago when they brought in, the rookie Paolo, and you could kind of see, okay, we've kind of just gone from poverty to a glimmer of hope, and I think that's the cool thing about it is Cade's been there a decent amount of time now, but you finally surrounded him with, some pretty solid NBA talent, and I think that's the cool part. And like you said, it's a great mix of young guys and veterans, and I think they shouldn't make a move at all. I think they should kind of just ride it out, let those guys progress. And I think you're gonna reap the benefits of that, whether versus like rushing it. You know what I mean? And bringing in somebody unnecessarily. So I think you could bring in like a lateral, like veteran player or something like that. Like I wouldn't have a problem with that, or like a minor upgrade at the veteran, part of the roster. But I definitely would not, tamper with the young guys.
Yeah, and I think that's the most likely scenario, and I think that's probably the right call, just because you don't want to mess too much, with it and gamble too much, with that. It's just like I said, the Ivy injury is tough, but I think, like you said, that's a good comparison. Like, they're probably that next Eastern Conference team that takes a jump from, bad team to play-in team to playoff team. That's the next one. I think.
Yeah,
I think the other teams are a little bit further away.
yeah, for sure.
Now we move on to the West, and the West I think is kind of where things are a little bit more jumbled up from the perspective of, I think we went into the season picking OKC as the clear-cut favorite in the West, and I think we still feel that way. They've won 12 in a row. They're 10-0 in their last 10. They're 27-5, right? So they're running away with it in terms of the one seed in the Western Conference, right? So obviously SJ's continued to play MVP level basketball, and we still haven't seen Chet Holmgren other than the early portion of the season. So that's kind of the cool part, or the cool thing with them is we're still waiting on the final form of this team, and they're already still 27-5. So I think for now, this still feels like the best team in the Western Conference. We'll see what it looks like come playoff time in terms of all those guys. Can they play well together in the postseason? Because I think that's the main question, because it's a young team. Do they possibly make, one of those, moves like, do you get a Cam Johnson? Like, do you consolidate some of the depth? I don't know. But they've been pretty much, they've been nothing short of spectacular, I think, this season. Right. They're kind of one of the, big three teams in terms of, right, those advanced numbers, right? The net ratings, right? Obviously they're number one in net rating right now. Their net rating's about 12, right? Which, I mean, that's ridiculous in terms of, what that means you're a really, really good team, right? Because it's them, it's the Cavs, and it's the Celtics, right? And funny enough, those are the three teams essentially with the three best records in the NBA. So not really too many negatives, I think, for that team. It's just obviously it's just a matter of health, right? Because can all those guys, can we see them all be healthy? Because there have been a few guys where we've not seen a whole lot of, right? Because they've been out of the lineup, right? Like, we haven't seen too much of Chet. We haven't seen too much of Caruso. I think when Chet was playing, right, we saw a really good version of him, but we just haven't seen enough. And when he comes back, if he can play at a level similar to what he was doing, I mean, like, there, that's pretty much like a big pickup right there. Um, After that, I think is kind of where you get kind of interesting, because Memphis right now, they're the 2 seed. They're 23-11. They just lost Ja, right, to a shoulder injury. He's week to week. That's kind of my main concern with the Grizzlies, is that I just don't know how much we can realistically trust the health of, their main guy over the course of a playoff series, because it just has not happened, right, where we've seen, this group be healthy. When they're together, right, those three guys, like Jaren Jackson Jr. is playing amazing, right? Basically like an all-star. Bane struggled to begin the season. He's now kind of gotten back into a groove. Job, had played well before anyways, right? Because they don't need him to score as much as he did before. He's kind of gone into more of like a balanced mode of attacking, but also setting guys up because they have such a deep roster. So there's a lot to like there. It's just a matter of, even Zach Edey, right? They're getting contributions from a bunch of their young guys. Edey, Jalen Wells. Even it's just they've had, injuries at different spots.
Mm.
And I just don't know come playoff time how all that's going to hold up. But they have so much depth that they'll still win a ton of regular season games. The Rockets, right, they're the 3 seed, and they've been, kind of a revelation this season. I think we expected them to be better, but not as good as they've been. It's just obviously, again, come playoff time, their question is, the core guys, can they step up and, be the best player in a playoff series? I don't necessarily know about that, but their defense obviously is, the crucial reason for why they've been in so many of these games. And I guess, like offensive rating, it's coming along, I guess, right? They're currently 12th in offensive rating. So that's better than what it was before, right? So that's good to see. They're second in defensive rating. So if they can get that up a little bit higher, then they're going to be pretty much set. And again, I think they're a team that probably doesn't, like it wouldn't shock me if they didn't really do anything because I think they at least just kind of want to see what does this look like, unless something kind of pops out of nowhere where it's like, it's an offer you can't refuse.
Mm.
But I think for Houston, you're checking all the boxes, right? In terms of like the growth from season to season. And now they've played themselves into what seems to be, a playoff team that's not going anywhere. And I think that's, close to the best case scenario you could have asked for, right? Denver, after starting the season off kind of slow, they've picked it up. Westbrook has been great. Jamal Murray, right, after kind of struggling at different points, he's been a lot better recently, right, where he's kind of giving you, better offensive production over the course of these games. Gordon's been out, right, so that obviously hurts the defense. They still can't really stop anybody, but at least you don't have quite as many issues with, what they have. It's still a matter of, like, they still probably need an extra guy, I think, for you to feel better about them. But I think you feel good about it. The tough one is the Mavs one because they were playing great. Now they're 4-6 in their last 10. Luka's been out, but in addition, other guys have also been out while he's been out because there were a couple of games where I think Kyrie was out, Clay was out. Obviously, you had the suspensions to PJ Washington and Najee Marshall, so they're kind of falling apart at the wrong time. And obviously, Luka's still going to be out for a while. And for a while, right? They were kind of away from a decent amount of these teams, but now they've kind of fallen back into the middle of the pack. I think there's at least enough there that we know when the team is healthy, they're really good and they definitely belong in that contender sphere. It's just, I think if you're Dallas, I think you would still just like to be, I just don't think you'd like to drop anywhere near the play-in. I mean, obviously, you don't really have much of a choice, right? If Luka's going to be out because that's your best player. And we talked about that, where their record without him was really good, but it's a smaller-ish sample size, right? Once you start pushing that to like 15 games, 20 games, that's where it becomes a lot more difficult. Because you also have to hope and pray that other guys don't miss time in addition to that, and that's what's happened. So they've had a lot of bad luck in terms of guys being in and out, but I do feel good about them in a way where I think this team is a legitimate championship team, just like last season. It's just a matter of can they be healthy. And because like I like personally, I trust them more than a team like Memphis, but I think Memphis has, over the course of the season shown that they're a really good team as well, which we thought they'd be. And then, then you have the play-in mix, but but these core five, I think these are the main teams to kind of look at in terms of like, contending for the Western Conference for now.
Yeah.
Obviously,
Yeah.
I think it'll change, but of course, right now, this is what we're looking at.
Yeah, for sure. I think, Oklahoma City definitely deserves to be leading the pack. Everything that they do on both ends of
Mhm.
the floor is amazing night in, night out. It really is a question of, okay, postseason, your backs are against the wall. Who's going to show up outside of SGA? And I'm not sure that we've seen that yet. We've seen good things and flashes from J-Dub, but is he really the clear-cut number two? Is he ready for that? Maybe, maybe not. And that was kind of funny. When we talked about Oklahoma City, I think in the offseason, somebody commented on the short and kind of brought that up. Like, they probably aren't going to be ready to win the title because, J Dub and Chet aren't, as far along as you would like in their development. They're great players and they're going to be great. But at this stage, are they ready to win the chip? Do they have what it takes? Who knows? But regardless, a 27-5 record is phenomenal. That's nothing to, um, you know, put your nose up
Yeah.
to. So it's amazing what they've been able to do, especially considering who they played. It's not like they've been playing a bunch of scrubs and slouches. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and then, Memphis and Houston, they're very interesting. They're similar, very good defensive teams. But I think the thing that sets them apart is Memphis is extremely better on offense. You have way more options on the offensive end. It's kind of similar to like Cleveland, where they're kind of just finding answers from everywhere. They're pretty deep, surprisingly. I didn't think they were going to be that good, but I knew that they would kind of return to form and be, one of the NBA's top defenses, but I didn't think the offense would look like this. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Fully
Mm-hmm.
healthy. Yeah, fully healthy. I think this team probably has a more realistic shot than everybody here but Oklahoma City. And
Mm-hmm.
that's just me being real. Just
Mm-hmm.
because we already know what Ja is, we know what Triple J can do as well. So I'd love to see them fully healthy. Houston, that's kind of an interesting one because they just got a hodgepodge of young talent, but nobody's really clearly the front running number one option. Definitely, in the fourth quarter that shows. But as a team, they play great team defense, and I think that's the thing that'll take them as far as it can get them. So that's
Yeah.
kind of how I feel about it. And then, like you said, Denver, not much to really say. Russ is just you know helping them a lot on both ends of the floor, and he's been doing his job.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where like, I'd probably feel quote unquote better about, I feel better about like Denver, Dallas than say Houston. It's just obviously, Houston's been a regular season machine, by and
Yeah.
large, and you gotta be able to get there. But the Russ thing is kind of fascinating, right? Because there's been a lot of conversations recently about, say like him compared to, the last couple of stops. It's been mainly, LA. I guess we just kind of forgot about the Clippers one, but just in general, what are kind of the key differences I think, that we've seen, from what he's doing in Denver versus what he's why it didn't work in LA. I think to me, really the biggest thing is that it's just a lot easier, I think, to fit him in on a team where, I think one, it's a better fit. I do think there's also like a bigger level of commitment in terms of what they want him to do, and he's actually doing it. But I
Hmm.
think the biggest thing is minimum contract versus max contract, right? And that's kind of to me the big key is that for the Lakers, you had to give up pieces to get him. And those were pieces that people complained about obviously at the time, right? Like people complained about KCP and Kuzma, at the time, but they were pieces that together did help you contend for a title, right? Where it's like, if you were able to basically say, Dennis Schroeder, you walk, and we're just going to replace you with Westbrook, and you just add on, then you probably have a better version. It's still not an ideal fit. I think, he fit fine next to AD, not quite as much with LeBron. But I think that's kind of the big thing there is that just in general, like, there's a big difference between acquiring a guy on a huge contract, and he just didn't pan out as he didn't live up to that contract, not by any standards. But here in Denver, right, it's a minimum contract. The expectations I think are a little bit lower, right? Because
Hmm.
there were many people that expected it to go horribly. Like I wasn't a huge fan of it, but it was more so to me the other pieces around it were more important, right? Than like say like if you don't have a good version of Jamal Murray, it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter what Westbrook does come playoff time, but just in terms of like that's kind of just something you want to give credit for because he has played very well and he is a big reason, especially why as of late the Nuggets have been able to turn it around. Like Murray's another key piece too, but you can't leave out Russ.
Yeah, I think the reason why he's been playing so well is, obviously what you said, but I think the other one is Jokic. We already know
Yeah,
the reputation that this guy has. Everybody he plays around, he makes them better, point blank, period. And I think
easy.
it's very it's very obvious and it's very clear. I think the best way that you can see it is when you look at the guard play. I think he impacts the guard play the most. Obviously, yes, the wings turn into backdoor machines and cutters all the time and spot up guys, but I think with the guards, it opens up a whole different level of play that I think Westbrook never really had in his career.
Mhm.
So it's kind of cool to see that. Like we even saw it like with Monte Morris. Like the only reason Monte Morris like got a bunch of contracts and is even really in the league to this day, in my opinion, is because of what he was able to do while playing alongside Nikola Jokic when Jamal Murray was hurt. Like that's a prime example of, you know, increased guard play when, you know, Jokic has, you know, another guard outside of Jamal Murray on the floor with him.
Yeah, exactly, and that's a good point. It's I think it's a lot easier to fit some of these type of guys around him just because of the fact that like he can play with the ball in his hands and orchestrate, but then obviously he can just play off other guys too,
Yeah.
right? Short roll guy, he can pretty much do it all on offense, in a way that not a whole lot of other guys can. But and again, just kind of pointing it out, just because he has played very well. We'll see what it looks like come playoff time, but I do think getting to the playoffs, is a big thing for them, right? Because I mean, they had back-to-back seasons where they were a top 3 seed, right? Or I guess yeah, top 2 seed, right? They were the 1 seed the title year, the 2 seed last season. So they still, got a little bit of catching up to do, but just in general, it's good to see that it looks better.
Yeah.
Now, this next crop of teams, right? From 6 to 12, I guess. We'll toss Sacramento in there, but the Clippers, I think, are kind of an intriguing team because they're 19 and 14. I think they just lost to Oklahoma City, right? So they're probably going to be 19 and yeah, no, they're 19 and 15, I guess. 19 and 15 because of the loss to Oklahoma City. But all of this is without Kawhi playing. And like in this game, Harden didn't play, but just in general, like, all of these games, they're above 500 without Kawhi playing. And this was a team that I think we all kind of looked at as like, this might be a bad team
Mm-hmm.
going into the season, right? Like they let Paul George walk. We did like the role players they brought in, but we still had questions about their actual ability to win games. And they've found a bunch of ways to win games. They've had some great defense. They've replaced Paul George with just some other depth, right? And Harden's been good. He hasn't shot the ball great, but he's just been kind of a guy that's been able to kind of facilitate. Norman Powell's been playing great. Is and now you're just kind of waiting on Kawhi to come back, and he's supposed to be back pretty soon within the next few days, right? So now you just kind of wonder, like, can they take off with him? You still have to hope and pray that he's healthy, and we just have not seen him be able to actually be healthy for a long enough stretch. He was close last season, but obviously by the end of it, he didn't have anything. But they're kind of a team I think to kind of at least just watch, right? Just because from the perspective of they've been better, I think, than we all anticipated. It's just a matter of, where are they going to be when it's all said and done, right? Like once the season is over, what do they look like? Then you have the Lakers as well, right? They're 18 and 14. They're 6 and 4 in their last 10. And that's with, a handful of role players being in and out of the lineup, right? Because like obviously LeBron and AD have been mostly healthy, but still no Jared Vanderbilt. Hasn't played in basically almost a year. Austin Reeves had a stretch, right, where he missed like 5 or 6 straight games with a back injury. Obviously now D'Lo's gone. He's been replaced with Dorian Finney-Smith. But just in general, a month ago, we made a video, right, like a short, about how awful they were looking and how it looked like there were some real problems, right, where they were getting destroyed on the defensive end. Just didn't really look together. It looked horrible, right? And they've since righted the ship. They're still not quite, I think, in that elite tier, but just in general, it's good to see that they're looking much better than they did a month ago, right? Just because it looked like a borderline disaster. And then after that, you move on to the next crop of teams, right? These core 4, I guess, right? Minnesota, San Antonio, Golden State, Phoenix, right? The Wolves, I think, have been very disappointing. They're basically a 500 team almost halfway through the season. Just don't really, to me, look like a championship team. DiVincenzo has played better as of late, and that's part of why they've looked better recently. But it's still just, to me, just still looks like a disappointment. I don't expect a whole lot of, improvement over the course. Maybe it'll get better, but I just don't think it'll get better enough unless there's like some type of trade that we just don't see right now. The Spurs, I think, are on a good trajectory, 6 and 4 in their last 10. Wemby's basically been like a top 10 player for the last, month or so after kind of struggling to begin the season. Golden State's been pretty up and down, mostly down this last month. I mean, they started the year off 12 and 3. Since then, they have been very, very bad, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
you're basically talking about what, 4 and 14, right, or something, yeah, or something along those lines. Like, just not good basketball. Everybody has had like a prolonged stretch where they've been playing poorly. So I think you're kind of just waiting for like a stretch where everybody starts playing better. But they just don't look like that great of a team. They've also had a brutal schedule, to be fair. But just in general, they're about, I think, what we expected. Maybe like a little bit better than I think we thought going into the season, but we didn't really expect much out of this team. I think this was the team, other than, of course, the Spurs, because we didn't even really look at them as a contender. But I think this was kind of the team that I think we expected probably the least out of. And it's kind of played out that way a little bit. And then you get to the Suns, which I think is the other massive disappointment, right? Like, we picked the over on this team. They looked great to begin the season, right? 8-1, but since then, 7-16, pretty much just as bad as Golden State. They've had a little bit of an injury issue, but it's the same thing as last year, right? Where it's like, about this time last year, the record was the same. I think you're kind of assuming and hoping that you'll get some better play from some guys. Maybe there'll be like a smaller trade, but it just doesn't really look that much different. Even with the new coach, even with the additional personnel, it just still looks like kind of to me the same disappointing team. Beal, even though he's good, just seems like it's kind of a pointless addition, as we talked about before. And then there's the Kings, where it's just, they've actually been, they've won the last couple of games, but they were really struggling prior to that. They had lost like 5-6 in a row, and they were just looking like, you know, a complete disaster compared to, maybe there was hope to begin the season. The DeRozan piece just looks kind of weird. They'll probably start playing a little better, but they still, to me, have been pretty underwhelming. But I wasn't super high on them anyways. But what are your thoughts on this tier of teams, right? This next group of six, because I think some of these teams could probably talk themselves into, if we make a couple of moves, we can move up another tier. It's just a matter of how realistic is it for them to actually be in that tier come playoff time.
Yeah, it's an awkward tier for sure. I think, starting with the Lakers, it's weird because I'm I know a lot of people are higher on them, than they were last month, but I'm kind of still in the same boat. Like, I'm high on a lot of the individual talent and individual play that I've seen. Like Max Christie has been pretty freaking sweet. Adding him into the starting lineup, I think their record has been a lot better since he's been added in. That's pretty cool. But regardless, you still have to look at the schedule and who they've played. They haven't really played a whole lot of teams that are better than them per se. I think they've just kind of beaten a lot of teams that were, you know, a little bit under them, I guess, if that makes sense. Like, I'm not super inspired by the competition they played. I think the only one that kind of made me feel good was probably when they played the Grizzlies. But, lo and behold, I don't even think everybody was healthy for the Grizzlies. But, you know, it is what it is. I think, the Lakers, they could do something, but I think they're a move away, but I'm not sure what that move is going to be. So yeah, I do agree with you in terms of like, yeah, there are certain teams in this tier that definitely are a move away where you could say, okay, well, if we're one move away, we can win the chip, but or have a chance maybe, but yeah, they're in
Yeah,
that tier.
I think it's more so a chance than like we're actually going to win it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Minnesota
Yeah.
dysfunction. I've been thoroughly displeased. I know they're currently in a crazy battle, I think, with the Celtics, but regardless, I've been thoroughly disappointed with how disconnected the team looked, and the whole thing is just really falling apart. Like you said, certain players have played better, but yeah, we kind of gotta jump ship on this one. I think everybody knows they're not going far in the playoffs, if at all. San Antonio, I've liked what I've seen from Wemby in the individual development. That's been awesome. The young guys, they've looked pretty cool. I think Stephon Castle has been underrated as a rookie. Pretty sweet. Warriors, kind of same thing as Minnesota, cooked until they make a move. The dysfunction has been quite annoying to watch. Some players just don't look good at all. Some players do look pretty good, but
The
it doesn't.
Minnesota one is more disappointing than Golden State only
Yeah,
because I think we expected more out of Minnesota than Golden State going into the season.
yeah, 100%. But with the Warriors, it looks like another potential wasted Curry year, unless you figure something out, because we're at the end of the line for Curry, to be honest. Like, although he doesn't look like it, it's not like, he has 10 years left or something like that. So
Mhm.
we do need to kind of take that into consideration. I think the Warriors do as well. So I kind of expect them to make some roster move. I'm just not sure what it's going to be, but some of those young guys probably have to go.
Yeah, I think they're probably I think it's a lot more likely that they probably do not like a marginal move, but I think like a guy like a Vucevic is
Okay.
probably a more realistic type of
I would like that
move
though.
than say if they got like a like a star. You know what I mean? I
Agreed.
think that's because I just don't think that they're actually going to sell off all the young guys just for a possible chance.
Yeah.
Especially if it's for like a Butler, maybe if like some other prime star
Yeah.
comes up, but I just don't really know which guy that is. And
Get certified talent though. Like that should be their
right,
their objective. Like get talent.
exactly, right, and like I guess this is kind of a question. Like, is Kaminga on the Warriors next season? Because
No.
by and large, in the summer, he wasn't involved in any of those trade packages where like they seemingly didn't want to trade him. But we also have not heard anything about them being that excited about re-signing him to a deal because it seems like he's looking for a lot of money, and it doesn't seem like there was any movement towards that, right? Because like they didn't sign him before opening night, so they can't until the off season. So that to me is kind of the question of like where do they view him in terms of the long term plans, and that's why it wouldn't shock me as much if they did like a Vucevic type trade and just kind of was like, we'll re-sign Kaminga, see where we're at and just kind of just ride it out. But I don't know how much I'm anticipating them to do a big move because I think we were kind of waiting to see if they would do that last season, right? Where we thought use Chris Paul's expiring maybe to bring in somebody, but they didn't do it. So what do you think? Do you think Kaminga's a Warrior next season?
I think he will be, but I don't think he should be. That's the best way to answer that, I think. Through granted, small sample size, I think it's 30 games.
Mhm.
There's been little to no progression from last year. It's
I think he's been better recently. It's just a matter of like I do remember last season we had that where he started off not great, played better through the rest of the season,
yes.
and then by the time it was like I guess play-in time or whatever, right? Then when it was like the most important stretch, those final 5 or 10 games, he just was not that big a part. I don't even think he played because he was hurt right around the end, but he was there for the last couple of games and then in the play-in. It just seems like again we talk. It's a weird fit. And that's where, like I
Yeah.
said, a Vucevic thing might help make that fit better. But and that's probably what they're looking for. I just don't see them making a big move, personally.
Yeah, I don't know. Everything about his game has just really been underwhelming in my opinion. Like it's just not really been um as advertised. I think, the Warriors thought they were getting like a freak athlete, a guy who could pretty much do everything on the offensive end outside of shoot. They thought the jumper would come along, but even then, I've just really not been wowed by a lot of what I've seen from him, and I just don't think, like you said, it's a good fit. I don't know. It just doesn't really mesh well together.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, again, like I think they can be better than what we've seen as of late. Just because I think at some point the schedule will ease up, and I think they'll get out of the funk where everybody's playing horribly. But I still see no version of this team that really does anything meaningful. And like you said, that's kind of the rough part where, like you said, you're getting close to the end for Steph, and it looks like he's probably just going to spend it, on like middle of the road teams, which is not unusual in terms of like older stars. It just is rough because it feels like he's still, if you can get him to the playoffs, he could get it done. I know he's been not as good recently, but just in general, that's the question. Like you said, I think Golden State has to ask themselves, and then the Suns. I don't know. Like
Cooked.
I don't think there's a real pathway for them at this point. Like, is there a move? I mean, like, I guess, people talk about how awful their centers are, but how are they going to get better centers?
You
Because,
don't.
like, I mean, like, because, like, Plumlee's a minimum contract guy. So you can't really, you're probably not getting a better center for the minimum, than him, like, in terms of swapping guys out. And then, like, Nurkic, I mean, nobody wants his contract, right? So, and that's, and to top it off, they're a second apron team. So I just don't really think there's a whole lot of flexibility that they realistically have. So I don't even know really what they can really do at this point. Like maybe they might swap a couple of the role players around, but I just don't really know if it matters as much. I just don't really see a realistic pathway for them to really, you know, it looked like it early in the season, but it just kind of has been more of the same. And like I said, it's a different coach. There's some role players that are a little bit different. And to be fair, you do have at least some continuity from last year because you have some guys that came back. But just in general, It's just it's just bad because like it's not even really a fun team to watch. Like you would at least think it would be a fun team to watch, but they've been pretty awful as of late. And like I said, I think there's probably a version that's better once they're healthy because this happened last season where they closed out the year on a good note, but it's just not enough of a sample size to me that makes me feel like this is going to be like again a dangerous team. It just feels like, you know, I think again we talked about it. Like the Beal trade, I think was the one that was the rough one because I think if you had traded just for Durant and then maybe you swap out some of those other guys, like you could swap out Chris Paul and Aiton for other guys, you'd probably be okay. But or really good. But I think the Beal one is just tough because like he's still good. It's just he's not what you need. You didn't need more of that. And it's funny because like with Boston, like they're kind of a team where they stacked a lot of their strengths on top of each other, but it's a clearly a winning formula, right? Like we don't have any real questions about like what the heck is the point of this guy on this team. Everybody on the team has a pretty defined role where you can easily see where they all fit. You can't say that about Phoenix, right? And like maybe the big three era we talked about is just kind of done. I mean, maybe if you had like a big three that fits, that makes more sense. But, they don't have the same level of depth, I think, as some of these other teams. And it's not like the bench guys are all horrible. It's just some of them don't do enough of the things I think you would like for them to do. Like in a playoff series, I just don't feel as good about their bench guys compared to some of these other teams.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm really at a loss for words with Phoenix. I think, their issue is definitely a little bit of redundancy, but it's also, you have all three of these guys who do similar things, but it's been very rare this season that we've seen all three of them kind of clicking. Like even Booker, I think he's kind of had a down season in terms of efficiency. Like the numbers are still somewhat there, but his efficiency isn't there. Beal's been super spotty. I think the only somewhat saving grace has been KD, and he missed a good chunk of time. So, that's the rough part. So yeah, I do agree with you. Like if it was just Book and KD, and then you potentially bring in some other talent to bolster up the low end of the roster, yeah, I think they would be in a completely different spot. They would probably be not I don't think they would be top five. I think they would probably be seven. It would be
Better than
better
this.
than 11. Better than
Better,
11.
better than, yeah,
Like, and that's
better
all
than,
that really matters. So I
yeah.
think going forward, you do kind of have to question the whole Beal thing. Do you bring in somebody else? Do you bring in, a plethora, a good crop of talent that could potentially, help you? I don't know, because what would that deal look like? That would be my big question with that. And would Beal even, because it all is contingent on one person, and it's
Mhm.
Bradley Beal, because he has to waive that no trade clause, which is why I think people were skeptical of even trading for him in the first place. And it was really only Phoenix fans. They were like, dude, what if this guy just completely screws us? And lo and behold, that might actually happen.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, to be fair, I don't want to necessarily like completely like just say it's all Bradley
It's
Beal's
not.
fault.
It's
But
not.
like just in general, just the decision to grab him, I think that was the wrong thing. It's like
Yes.
kind of like what we said about like Westbrook and LA, where it's like it wasn't all his fault, but the initial decision to acquire him was the mistake because, like when they first made the trade, I didn't feel like as, I didn't feel quote unquote as scared of it of that combination as maybe some other ones in the past just because we just didn't know what version we were going to see. And again, like he's been fine. It's just he hasn't been available. He wasn't available for most of last season. So you were just had like a big max slot that just wasn't being filled at all. And then come playoff time, he wasn't even really that great. Like, he
Yep.
was probably the worst of those three. And none of them really played that well, but like he was the worst of the three, unfortunately. And that's the one that you were kind of hoping, like, which is wild because towards the end of the regular season, he looked really good. And I think it's just kind of just kind of a classic case of like sometimes you can have too much of a good thing,
Yeah.
except this isn't really a good thing. This is kind of just bad. Like, if you're the Suns, if you're the front office and ownership, this is not where you would have wanted to have been, 2 seasons in. Because you could at
Horrible.
least make even the case of like, all right, it didn't work out last year, but hopefully it works out this year. And it's like, nope, it's basically almost the exact same.
Yep. It's crazy.
Yeah, and then the Kings, what do you do with them? Because like, yeah, they've won two in a row, but it still doesn't feel like to me like that this team is anywhere close to really being, a real factor in the playoff picture at all, which is what they were hoping to be, going into the season.
Yeah. I think it's not. Once again, it's kind of similar to Phoenix. Like DeRozan is a good player, but not for the Kings. Like, and his numbers aren't bad, but if you watch them, he does take away a little bit from what their main guys do, and he's one of them. But he takes away from Fox somewhat, and he takes away from Sabonis as well. Another thing is some of their guys just flat out have just lost their mojo this season. Like Murray hasn't been that good. Keegan Murray been okay, but definitely not. Hasn't taken the leaps and strides that I think a lot of people kind of projected that he would be. I think Malik Monk's played okay, but like Keon Ellis, not really all that. I mean, it's just they don't
Played
have
a
a
whole
lot.
lot recently. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. That was kind of a concern that people had about his playing time.
they don't have a lot of depth. That's another thing. They're relying a lot on the top end talent, but similar to Phoenix, when all three of your guys do the same thing, and one of them's not really clicking, I think it's very evident that it's not really going to work, and they can't close games. I mean, like you said, they did. They have won those two games, but before that, they were not a good fourth quarter team. So
Yeah, and then these last three teams: Portland, Utah, New Orleans. I mean, these are teams that are pretty much done.
cooked.
I mean, like Portland, like they're kind of in a weird spot because like they've had guys in and out of the lineup, and like I wish I could feel a little bit better about some of like actually like Klingon. I think he's been fine. But I just wish that I could see a little bit more of some of these young guys. But their roster is just so bizarre where it's like a mix. We've talked about it of guys that probably should be on other teams, and then other guys where it's like you'd like to see like I'd like to see more of Donovan Klingon, but you really can't because when their center rotation is healthy, he's not going to be starting over DeAndre Ayton. And then, he and Robert Williams, it's just kind of a weird thing where it's like, they can only play but so many minutes together because they don't really space the floor like that. But just, and then like for Utah, they're a mess. I mean, like, I guess this is what they wanted. Markkanen has not been as good this season, which is kind of just weird. But, obviously, like, Kessler, he's had a major bounce back year. You're just kind of waiting for can they move any of these veteran guys at all? Like, I think that's what they're hoping for. Like, they're constantly in trade rumors. But to be honest, most of the guys that they've drafted this year, we either haven't seen a ton of, or they just haven't even really been that amazing, right? Like, we haven't seen a whole lot of Collier, right? Just because of the guard rotation, right? He's just not going to be playing over the other guards. I don't think we've seen Cody Williams basically almost at all.
No,
That was a guy that I think we both liked going into the draft. So I don't know. Maybe he's just not ready. I have no clue. Sensabaugh, I guess, looks better. But not really a whole lot of positives, I feel like, for that team. I mean, like, they have, like, a couple of, like, Filipowski, I guess, when he plays is fine, but, like, not a whole lot of bright spots for this team outside of, I guess, Kessler. I guess the bright spot is you're bad. So I guess, that's the thing that we talked about where it's like, if you're not going to trade Markkanen, you might as well just be bad with Markkanen and then just kind of hope that you get, a really good pick in the draft and, pair them together. So I guess you got that, but I'm not really feeling too crazy about a lot of their young players right now.
yeah, it's rough. Going back to Portland, there is a trade I wanted to revisit, the Avdia trade. I think he's
Mm-hmm.
been mid for Portland. I don't know, but
Mm-hmm.
hard to really kind of even gauge it because the team is just so, like you said, awkward. Um, Scoot hasn't even been that good. Like it's just nothing has really gone their way.
Mm-hmm.
I guess you kind of liked what you saw from Shaden Sharp, but
Like a
you,
few bright spots, but like not a lot.
I
Like just
I
also
can
because of
only
the
I can't really name one
Scoot
if you
had a
want me to be
game winner, I
honest.
guess.
Who?
Scoot had a game winner.
Okay,
Like
I'm congrats. I mean, but they're not winning a lot of games. So, and in my opinion, I don't think he's really looked number two or number three overall pick worthy. So, yeah, he's looked number two all right. But
yeah,
oh
and
man,
then
what a disaster.
the Pelicans, right? Another absolute disaster, right? Where it's just another year of not a whole lot of Zion, not a whole lot of Ingram, except they've been even worse, right? Like I
Yeah.
think the thing that's unfortunate now is the last several games they've had more of their guys available, right? Like they haven't had as much recently of like literally only like 5 guys in the rotation like it was earlier in the season. Like they've had Trey Murphy and he's actually played well. They've had DeJounte Murray. They've had CJ McCollum. Yves Missi has played very well, right? He's looked a lot better than I think we would have expected, right? Like he could be a possible rookie of the year guy. Um, but just they still stink. And that's just kind of the weird part. Like I think you would just kind of feel like I think it's just a little bit surprising that like I know Zion and Ingram are out, but I feel like you in theory should have enough to where like you should at least win some of these games, but they've lost 11 in a row. And it just, now you got rumors about what they might do potentially with those guys. It's awful. And it's like just kind of wild just because coming off of last season, you felt good, I think, about New Orleans, right? Obviously, like, Zion didn't play in the end, but the regular season wise, before he got hurt, he looked really good to close out everything, right? A lot of their other role players looked good, so I think he kind of just assumed, like, they'll probably move Ingram, swap him out, and you're probably just back in business as usual. But yeah, they've not been back in business at all. And it's just been really depressing, I think, for this team where it now almost feels like they might be this close to just like blowing it up.
Yeah, I think, yeah,
Yeah.
like you
You
said,
described.
they're literally like an inch away from
Yeah.
blowing it up for sure. Like you can just tell the signs are kind of all over the place. It's written on the walls, really. And like you said, the collection of talent would have been pretty cool to see if they were all freaking healthy. But you are missing your two main guys, and every move that you made hasn't really looked that great, except for drafting Yves Missy. But is that really going to amount to a whole lot in the long run? Probably not. And I think that's what this team is kind of dealing with. Is like, where do we go from here?
Yeah, I mean, then that's the tough part, just for them. But unfortunately, there's always at least one or two teams every year, right, that always end up being kind of disappointing, and it looks like it's New Orleans. I guess, to make a long story short, in regards to what you've seen from both conferences, is there anything that you've seen that makes you feel a little bit more skittish about either of your, picks to make the finals, and or win the title, or are you pretty confident in what you have?
I mean, I love what the Knicks have been doing, in terms of offense. They've been winning games left and right. Granted, a lot of chump teams, like they played the Wizards twice, but, they should be blowing them out. And, well, in one of them, they only won by 4, but the other one, they won by 20. So,
Mhm.
I do like what they've been doing offensively. Jalen Brunson, Carl Anthony Towns, they look awesome together. Like I said, 1A, 1B for sure. And the defense has turned a nice little corner. I think I like the wing play on Anobi and Mikal Bridges. I think I've liked what I've seen from them. Am I
Mhm.
super confident that they can take on Boston? um, that's what they were kind of built and designed to do, but
Mhm.
I don't think they have that bench that can really go toe to toe. I don't think they can kind of reach into their bag and pull out Deuce McBride and hope that he can go toe to toe with, a guy like Peyton Pritchard who's been having a
Mhm.
great year. So that's kind of where my worries start to creep up, because outside of Deuce McBride, you can't really go much further than that. Whereas Boston can go a little bit deeper, and those are solidified role players. Like when they are in, they are doing pretty much one thing and one thing only. Um, but collectively, it all adds up, and I think that's where the Knicks are kind of lacking in that department. Where I just don't think they have the bench to go toe to toe with Boston. Say we get to the Eastern
Yeah,
Conference Finals.
yeah, I pretty much agree with that. I think as of right now, you're probably just kind of waiting on Mitchell Robinson, right? Just kind of waiting to see when he comes back and see what you can get there, and that can help give you some different looks because we've already kind of seen what they look like when say like it's not Towns, but it's Precious Achua, or sometimes they can play together, right? And now Achua's even hitting some threes, and now you'll have an additional big guy to put out there with Robinson, and then he can play alongside Towns, right? Because we saw Towns play alongside Gobert in Minnesota. So I think that'll be kind of interesting to see them get another look. But you are right in terms of I think the depth part is where it's a little bit scary. Um, but they're not really going to be playing a whole lot of bench guys anyways. With a Tibbs team, like those guys are going to probably play 40 plus minutes. Um, come playoff time. But I think their starting five has definitely, continued to get better and better. And again, unlike the Celtics, they had to start off differently anyways because it's a different Knicks team. Like there's a lot of moving parts that are coming in compared to last season, right? It's a very different team, so they had to kind of go through the ups and downs of what it's like, to kind of put together a new roster and play through a new roster and get all the kinks ironed out, right? Whereas with the Celtics, pretty much everybody from last year's team is back,
Yeah.
right? So it's not really any different. It's just for them, it's a matter of getting through the regular season healthy. But the Knicks kind of have to learn how to play together, and they have learned how to play together, as of late. Now in the Western Conference, do you still feel, the same about OKC, where it's like I think you think they're going to make the finals?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah,
I think just because of the severe drop off, I think, after them, I think, they're pretty much the clear cut favorite. Obviously there's some guys on some teams that you can't really count out. Like we know how good some of these guys are because they've been there before, they've won championships before, but I just think OKC is as a group, they've just been doing things that put them in their own little tier, I think, this season.
and again, like I said, without you know stretches of both of their bigs, I think
Yeah.
that's the part that you are impressed by. Where I think if they can get both of them back together, playing together, and we get to see that look, where they can have presumably 48 minutes of decent size out there, or if not, like they can still go to their smaller lineups. That's what I kind of want to see. And even without that, they've been one of the best teams in the NBA, and they were the one seed in the West last season. But I do think this version of the team is better, just because Hardenstein alone just gives you a better option in terms of size and rebounding and interior defense while still fitting in with what they want to do. Like it's not like he stands out as like kind of an awkward guy. Like he fits basically right in. They just got to be healthy, and that's kind of the thing with them because they had a stretch where last season pretty much all their main guys were pretty healthy, but
Yeah.
this season has not been the case. I mean, SGA's been healthy, but like no Chet for most of the season. Hardenstein's been out for he missed the first several games, and then Caruso has been, I think, absent for a little bit, right? And even before that, he missed time. But if they can just get healthy come playoff time, I still feel pretty good about my pick.
Yeah.
It's just again like for them, it's about health. Like the Celtics, can you get healthy? OKC, can you get healthy? And that's kind of where I think we are with that.
Yeah.
Now, in terms of news and rumors going on, so we got a quote from Jimmy Butler after the game. Um, and he said a couple of things that I think are, kind of sound the alarm probably, right? He mentioned, I'm happy here, off the court. And then he also mentioned, he was asked if he thinks he can get his basketball joy back as a member of the Heat. And he said, probably not. So, you know, I don't know. It's starting to get kind of loud in there. So, just again, this was after a game, of course, where they got annihilated by Indiana, and he was, a part of that. But just in general, the question keeps coming back to me of like, where's he gonna go?
Right.
That's kind of the question that I have. Is that like, where is he realistically gonna go? Um, and if he goes there, like that team is gonna want to pay him. I mean, maybe it could just be like a 1 year thing. Who knows? But just in general, like that's my main question. Is I just don't know where this guy is gonna go in terms of like what team is trading for him. What are they gonna give up to get him? Are they gonna presumably pay him? Whatever he's looking for. But then it's like, but it feels like it's getting harder to envision him staying in Miami either, despite what Pat Riley has said. I don't know. It's been
Yeah.
such a in a wild situation, and like that's why I'm saying like the Heat are a team to continue to watch.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's going to be arguably, story slash trade of the year, to be honest. And I think there's too much tension from both sides for me to think that they're going to continue with the Jimmy Butler era. So I think it's probably an end of an era, and I think they're probably going to find somebody to kind of emerge and be the suitor for Jimmy Butler. But yeah, it's a crazy situation to be honest, because normally this stuff really wouldn't be said publicly. But
Yeah. And then last but not least, just a quick thing on the Fox situation, right? Orlando now, according to the Athletic, has emerged as a possible destination. Now they did mention that from the Athletic, the idea that it may be more likely, according to Sam Amick, that he might just be moved in the offseason
mm-hmm.
as opposed to the trade deadline. Again, maybe part of that just we'll have to kind of see where this Sacramento thing goes. And in general, like these type of deals are probably increasingly harder to pull off during the season. But they mentioned, the other teams. They mentioned the Spurs, the Heat, somehow LA. I don't really know how, but they're always
No.
there. But regardless, um, what do you think about the fit in Orlando? Because I know we had already talked about the Spurs and the Rockets, but Orlando hadn't really been a team that's been really brought up consistently in terms of like a team that's been searching for a star. Because they have the two guys, Franz, Paolo and Franz, and people have talked about the idea of adding, an offensive minded guard, but it just never seemed like it really would come to fruition. And like Suggs is there as well, but what do you think of that? And like,
Mm.
what is even the package as well? Like, if they were to pull it off.
Part of me likes it, part of me hates it. I would like Orlando to go after a more facilitating type of guard. And honestly, I really don't even think they should like, seek that out in the trade market. I think they should kind of draft it. I think you can never go wrong with homegrown talent, but you know, is Anthony Black going to be that guy? Probably not. I mean, he's looked pretty good this year, but I don't know if he's like a true PG. And Fox is definitely, an offensive guy, can score the ball at will. I just don't want that to take away from what you have, at those wing positions.
Mhm.
And that would be my concern. And I don't think that would impact Paolo as much. I think that impacts probably Franz a little bit more. I just don't want Franz to be relegated to a freaking spot up. You know what I mean? So
Sure.
that's kind of how I feel about it. And as for a package, I don't even know where that would begin
Right.
because
Yeah.
what
I don't know.
Fox is making max money, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's in the 30s, so it's not quite a ridiculous amount. Although, he turned down the first extension, and I think that's
Yeah.
kind of where all this has come from. Now, to be fair, if he makes all NBA, then he can get the big max deal, right? With the one that's like, 250 million or 300 million or whichever it is.
Yep.
But just in general, the fact that this keeps coming up, it feels like I said, I don't know if it happens at the deadline. But just in general, like he's a guy, he might be the next young guy to kind of look out for. He's not even that young at this point, but he is 27. He's in his prime, or entering his prime. Like that might be the next guy to look out for. But it is kind of a weird fit, but it's hard to kind of turn down like an opportunity to trade for a guy who's like essentially like a top 20-ish player. Like I feel like that's kind of just hard to say we're good, you know? But I understand like it's kind of a weird fit just because like, if that were to happen, like you got to make sure that at least one of those three guys is basically like a knockdown three-point shooter. And Franz was better at it this year before he got hurt, but that's still like, a tough ask, right? Not, just it's a weird fit just because I think, like you said, it's going to turn one of those guys into more of an off ball type guy. And
Mm-hmm.
it probably can't be Fox and it probably shouldn't be Paolo either. So it's going to be Franz. But then the question is, could he even really realistically be like the second best guy on a championship team? Like that's the question there too. And that's where like, if they can get him, like they're not going to turn that down. It's just again a matter of like wish casting with like what's the package.
Yeah.
Presumably, I guess they put the other young guys in there, right? Like Black's probably in it. Like Jet Howard's probably in it, and then whatever other salary filler they can get in there.
Yes, sir.
Um, like, do you swap Suggs and Fox? Like, I mean, is that
I'm not
is
doing
that
that. I'm not doing it.
that feels like almost what it might have to be? Because I mean, I don't know if they're gonna have like all four of those guys making 30, 40 million a year. Like, I mean, the thing that helps them out, unfortunately, is the fact that because of the Palo injury, he's not getting a super max. He's gonna get like a normal max deal. And that's where that might give them a little bit more flexibility compared to, what would normally happen, where he might be like the third highest paid guy on the team, right? Compared to, he'd be right there with Franz. So maybe that might be more likely, but like if you're Sacramento, I don't know why you would do it and not at least inquire about Suggs because I just feel
Yeah,
like you would get
I, I agree. But if I'm Orlando, I'm saying Suggs is untouchable.
right.
To be honest,
And he's
that's how much
played
I
very
like his
well.
game. I love his game.
Yeah, exactly. And like they shouldn't feel like they have to trade him. Like
You're
he's
right.
been awesome. And like, again, as the cap continues to go up, it sounds like a lot of money, but he's, again, like I mean, I'd rather pay him than than not. So
Yeah,
that's
you're right.
and that's a question that Orlando is going to have to ask eventually. Like, do they have to ask it now? Like, probably not. But because can we at least see what it looks like with the other guys back first? And see where
Yeah,
that is, because they might be really good if those guys come back and they're healthy. But just in general, it's just something to watch out for. Like, it feels more and more like, at the very least, Fox probably has gone after this season, right? At the very least, right? Like, that feels like where it's headed. Where
yeah,
like this might be like, maybe he doesn't get moved by the deadline, but unless they can figure out something, I just have a hard time envisioning him staying long term.
makes
Just
sense.
because, like, what's the point at this
Yeah,
point?
right.
Well, that's it for today's episode of Off Ball Takes. Again, let us know your thoughts in the comments about where we're at in terms of the NBA thus far. And there'll honestly be more to talk about, as we're going on, right? Like, in terms of, like, front runners for some of these awards and things like that. But we're almost at the halfway point of the season in the NBA, and we're a little over a month away from the trade deadline too. And I think that's where it's going to get really fun, just to kind of see, what moves are made, if any. But just, as a whole, we still continue to appreciate all the love and support. Don't forget to like and subscribe. If you leave a comment, we'll read it at the beginning of the video, and we'll see you in the next one.